Welcome to my channel, The Snake Said to the River. Today I'm going to lead us through an introduction to medieval fingerloop braiding, a gorgeous textile handicraft with ancient roots. In medieval days, these sturdy, elegant fingerloop braids were used both practically and ornamentally, mainly on clothing and accessories. They were used as straps, drawstrings, lacing, trim, etc. They were made primarily of silk, linen, and wool, and they were dyed all sorts of colors. These braiding patterns range from the incredibly simple to the incredibly ornate. Some could be worked by one person on their own, and some thicker and more ornate bands required a team of two. We're also very lucky that in the late medieval and the Renaissance, various tutorial manuals for many braiding patterns were created, allowing us to accurately replicate these braids in the modern day. For my primary source for today's video, I'm referencing a manual from the 1600s called Nature Unbowelled, which is a rather alarming title, but it's full of fascinating miscellanea, including historical medicinal concoctions and, to our point, a long section on the making of laces, referring to fingerloop braids. We are going to be making the first two braids in that manual. They are the easiest to make, so I thought as a total introduction to fingerloop braiding, that would be the place to start. If you're wanting to go further, I've shared a video on my Patreon this month that features 4 fancy ornate fingerloop braids. So if you're interested in that, I hope you'll join me there. Fingerloop braids are made in exactly the manner that their name implies. Lengths of string are knotted into loops. One end of those loops is collectively hooked over something sturdy, and the other ends are slipped over the fingers and braided in specific repeated patterns. Back in the medieval and Renaissance days when our manuscripts were being written, these loops were called bois, bows. The materials you'll need for your fingerloop braids are pretty minimal. You'll need thread or string of some sort in as many colors as your braiding pattern calls for. I'm working with simple cotton embroidery floss here. You'll also need a pair of scissors. And if you want to finish your braids with a tassel, you'll also need a tapestry needle and a comb. To make your loops, you'll need to cut strands of equal length from your string. The braiding pattern you're following will tell you how many and in which color. 3 tips. First, the lengths that you cut should be no longer than a little beyond your arm span, or they'll become too unwieldy to work with. Second, the loops will be really difficult to work with if they're uneven, so after you've made your initial cuts, bundle all the strands together and trim each end so that you're sure that the lengths are uniform. Third, if you want a thicker braid, you can always use 2 or more strands in each loop, as I'm doing here. To transform the strands into loops, fold each strand in half and make a knot at the end. And there are your boas. To set up for your project, you'll need to secure one end of all the loops around something sturdy. You can clamp them to a table, you can tie them around the arm of a chair, you can even have someone hold that end, etc. I like using this little tool called a warping peg. You secure the end to the end of a table or something like that, and you end up with this super sturdy post to work with. Now that our loops are made and they're secured and ready to go, we need to get them onto our fingers in the right position. Historical fingerloop braiding manuals teach us that each finger is assigned a letter to facilitate explaining the braiding pattern. On both hands, right hand and left hand, index fingers are A, middle fingers are B, ring fingers are C, and pinky fingers are D. In multicolor fingerloop braids, the instructions tell us which color to put on which finger of each hand, as well as how many loops in each color are required. The 2 simple braids we're making today are all in a single color, so we only have to worry about which fingers should be holding a string. Our first braid will instruct us to set bows on B and C right, and on A, B, C left. So that's going to look like this. On to braiding technique. First, there are 2 ways to pick up a loop, either unreversed, which means from the top of the loop, or reversed, which means picking it up from the bottom of the loop. Picking up a loop reversed causes it to twist as it moves from one finger to another. Second, these braids often require you to pass your finger thoroch through other strings. For example, here I'm passing my right hand A through B and C, and then through left hand C and B. Third, we're often instructed to raise or lower our loops. This means to walk the loops up or down your fingers. So for instance, here I'm raising the loops of my right hand from B and C up to A and B. And now I'm lowering them from A and B down to B and C. Fourth, tightening. In order to end up with a super sturdy braid and a clear pattern, we need to tighten the braid as it's forming in between each cycle of the pattern. You achieve this just by swinging your arms out and tugging on the strands a bit. Alright, that is it for a rundown of the basics. We are now ready to move on to our first finger loop braid. This braid is called a broad lace. It's simple, it's practical, it's just a flat braid made of 5 bows in one color. Let's get set up. This braid is made with 5 loops in a single color. The pattern instructs us to place loops on right hand B and C, and on left hand A, B, and C. Move 1. Right hand A goes through B and picks up left hand C reversed, so by the bottom of the loop. Move 2. Lower the left hand loops from A and B down to B and C. Move 3. Left hand A goes through B and picks up right hand C reversed. Move 4. Lower the right hand loops from A and B down to B and C. And that's it, we're back at our starting point. Repeat and repeat that pattern until you run out of space on your loops to continue braiding. Once you reach the end of your string, just slip the loops off your fingers, and now it's time to secure the ends of the braid. You can do this by tying a simple knot at both ends, using closures, or by making a decorative tassel, which is what I'm going to show you how to do here. Cut a length of string to about 3 times as long as your tassel is going to be. I pull out 2 strands of the tiny threads that make up a single strand of embroidery floss, since I don't want this wrapping to be too thick. Center the thread at the bottom of the braid and tie it tightly in a double knot. Wrap the thread around the braid several times, then thread it onto a needle and pull it through the center of the wrapping. This effectively hides the thread within the tassel. Cut the looped end with scissors, fluff out the strands with a comb, and trim the ends of the tassel to an even length. Repeat this process on the other end of the braid, and with that, our first medieval finger loop braid is complete. Our second braid is called the lace round, and it's just the rounded cord-like sibling of the broad lace that we just made. In fact, it's just one tiny move that transforms this braid from flat to round. I find this braid especially fun to make because it's super easy to introduce a contrasting color into the mix and end up with these beautiful repeated chevron shapes that are inherent to the pattern. So for this one, I just did 1 bow in a contrasting color. And in this one, I alternated between 2 colors, and you can see how you end up with these gorgeous chevrons. For today's video, I'm just going to do a classic lace round in 1 color. The setup for the lace round is identical to the broad lace. 5 loops in one color over right hand B and C and left hand A, B, and C. First move. Right hand A goes through B and C to take left hand C reversed. Second move. Lower the left hand loops from A and B down to B and C. Third move. Left hand A goes through B and C to take right hand C reversed. Fourth move, lower the right hand loops from A and B to B and C. Tighten your braid, and again, that's it. Just repeat and repeat this pattern. Here it is again. And that completes our introduction to medieval fingerloop braiding. Again, if you're interested in getting into more ornate and intricate braiding patterns, I hope you'll join me over on Patreon, where I offer monthly episodes packed with historical music, cookery, craft, story, and more. Fingerloop braiding is such a satisfyingly hypnotic and rewarding handicraft to get into, and you end up with something equally practical and beautiful. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.